And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 88th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, May 14th, 2019, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. You can catch our live broadcast Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. on our YouTube page or our website. If you missed the live broadcast, you can subscribe to our show for free on whatever platform you listen to podcasts, so you can listen on your own time. Check out our Twitter and Facebook at the Hoosier Sound and at Indiana HQ, and subscribe and turn that bell on so you can get the notifications whenever we got something that comes your way. All of our information is in our website, indianahq.com. All right, Hoosier Nation, it is time for some sports talk. On the docket for tonight, John Beilein, now a former head coach of the Michigan Wolverines, has accepted the head coaching position of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And we will be discussing how it affects Indiana and the Big Ten before moving on to the state of Indiana. The Governor's Cup results recently came out, and Indiana beat Purdue 10.5 to 9.5.
Woohoo!
Which we'll basically be discussing Indiana versus Purdue for the episode. So that's going to be exciting, for better or for worse. Here with me tonight, the New York Knicks and Cleveland Cavaliers, two of my Phoenix Suns, are here with me tonight, helping me break everything down, or in other words, the usual Matt Lukens and Nathan Christian. Nathan, how are you doing tonight, and did you get my clever take on who you guys are tonight?
Well, I like that, especially because right now, and I don't know for those of you that'll listen to this when you'll hear us, but right now we're recording live on a Tuesday night as the NBA draft lottery is about to get underway, and all three of us are rooting for teams that missed the playoffs last season, so we can get either Zion or Ja Morant or RJ Barrett or whoever. So, I'll be a bit of a nervous ball of who knows what. For the entire episode.
And those three teams were the three teams that have the best odds, since they changed it this year, have the best odds to get the number one pick. And it also works perfectly because one of those three teams, aka the Cleveland Cavaliers, now have John Beilein as the head coach, which goes perfectly with our first topic. So, Matt, how are you doing tonight? And kick us off with your thoughts on how John Beilein affects the Hoosiers and the Big Ten overall.
Well, first off, it's nice to be home. That's how I'm doing. I'm finally home and chilling out since you guys last heard from me. But anyways, how the John Beilein news affects IU. Well, of course, it's kind of sad if you like the Big Ten from a depth standpoint, as far as coaching talent, because as far as coaching talent goes, the Big Ten is probably second in the country as far as top to bottom, who's got the best coaches. You could argue maybe even first if Coach K and Roy Williams didn't exist. But losing John Beilein, obviously he's the second best head coach you guys would say in the Big Ten to the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's kind of disappointing just because we don't get to play him every year. Playing him makes our team better. Now, on second thought, and the recruiting wise, I think it's really helps IU because somebody who recruits in the same type of players and from the same area leaving makes that school worse. Now, it depends who they hire. Right now, if they go and get Brad Stevens and break all of our hearts, then maybe that was the worst possible thing to happen. But if they go and hire somebody like Steve Wojnarowski from Marquette, right? Or they go hire somebody like Greg Marshall. While they're great coaches, they're not exactly the world's greatest recruiters. And so that might actually help IU going further, especially Archie, somebody who likes to recruit one and dones and high-rated recruits. Having a school in our area that recruits the same type of players be out of the equation makes less people you have to fight against. And that's always good for IU. So I think it's a bit of a good and a bad thing, honestly.
Agreements, disagreements, Nathan?
Well, Matt, I think the initial reaction when everyone heard the news on Monday morning was just, stunned, right? I think we were all just shocked that John Beilein, who, I don't know, maybe I was just missing out on the signals, but it didn't really seem like he was considering any sort of NBA position. No. Okay, maybe people give him an interview. Beilein did an interview with Detroit last year,
Correct.
but I don't think anyone was really expecting this move. And but the one thing I will say is, on the surface, it seems like a huge loss for Michigan. But I like the point you made, Matt. Before we really make a final conclusion or final judgment on this, we have to see who replaces Beilein at Michigan. Right. If they go out and get a guy who has a lot of connections within the state of the Indiana and in the Midwest, just same as always. Michigan, who has been one of the most successful programs in the Big Ten for the last, half decade to a decade, really for most of Beilein's tenure, which was about 12 years at Michigan. If they get someone who can coach at a similar level as Beilein could, or maybe even better, then what? So look, until we really see who they replace him with, I'm going to wait and see how this goes, because, after all, Michigan could just as likely be an extremely competitive team in the Big Ten next year.
Mm-hmm. And we can talk more later about just Michigan specifically in the near future, but aside from maybe the more far future and how this might stack up for the Big Ten and Indiana overall, I think it's pretty easy to say. So right now NBA is on our minds just because the draft lottery is going on as we are currently recording. So everyone in the entire league is just like, when are the Warriors going to break up? It's finally going to be gone. But if you take a step back and you have an unbiased opinion, the Warriors are better for basketball just because they've got such good talent and it makes everyone else better around them. And the same kind of goes, it's kind of a bad example, but the same almost goes for Michigan and the Big Ten. If Michigan is not doing as well, usually the Big Ten is not as prominent as it usually is. Because when you think of the Big Ten having a good season, like this past season, one of the teams that are usually near the top in the top 5, if not higher, is Michigan. And John Beilein has been a testament to that the past decade or so when he's been the head coach at Michigan. So it's easy to say, oh, next year there's a good chance Indiana could creep up ahead Michigan, and just that's another team off the list per se. Check off that team that Indiana can get past and try and get to a better ranking, get a better NCAA seed and everything. But when it comes tournament time, if you aren't preparing yourself by playing the best of the best, then you're going to get hit in the mouth potentially when you get to those teams like maybe the ACC that are usually year to year having great depth and just being able to play those really good teams. So it's something that I feel like it's really easy, because when I first saw that, I thought that was interesting, especially since John Beilein declined even stuff like the Pistons job last year and all that, even though it was closer to home and everything. So I think it was just what he wanted, which is like the specific spot. I don't think he wanted the spotlight in the NBA. I think he wanted a team that he could help rebuild and restart. But I thought at the very first thing, I thought compared to IU, I'm like, nice, Indiana's got another team that they could probably beat the next few years. But then when you think about it a little more, it might not be as good. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. Yeah, Indiana could potentially, especially with Archie coming up, hopefully go over Michigan on a year-to-year basis. But then in terms of depth in the Big Ten, it might not be as good if Michigan, of course, does not falls from what they've been the past couple of years. What are you going to say, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, but the other side does exist where, John Beilein, we can't understate how great of a coach he was. This is a guy who
still is.
Right. Oh, no, I know. The only reason I used past tense because his time at Michigan seems to have come to an end. He went 278 and 150 at Michigan, and over 12 years, you kind of do some quick math in your head, 278 wins in 12 seasons. That's over 20 wins a season on average for over a decade. It's not going to be easy to find a guy to fill his shoes. And if for whatever reason Michigan struggles to find the right guy, after all, it is a school that focuses more on football. It is a school that struggles to fill out their arena. If they miss on this coaching hire, the Big Ten is competitive. It's tough. It does not care how popular your program is or how famous your program is. People will be extremely happy to see Michigan go through a 3-17 season in the Big Ten. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but given how successful they've been recently, people are not going to take it easy on the Wolverines. So if they don't find the right guy, now all of a sudden you start thinking, okay, maybe this could be a team that IU can leapfrog as far as Big Ten success going forward.
Yeah, and I agree, because like I said, it's a bittersweet moment. I think I'd love to see Michigan have a 3-17 season, just because it's like, hey, they finally get to be in the doghouse for a season like all of us at some point recently. Right. So in terms of them getting a head coach, if they have a guy that they want, I think they're going to be able to find him. You could make the argument that obviously John Beilein didn't leave right at the end of the season, so they didn't get basically the right pickings. They didn't get the first come, first serve and they're the very end of stuff. But it's Michigan. If they want an up-and-coming, basically an Archie Miller type of young coach that they could see being a future, they're going to get him. It's Michigan. They're going to leave their Dayton or whatever school that they're at to go to Michigan. So I don't think that's necessarily going to hurt Michigan. If they have a coach they want, they're going to get him. I think at this late in the game, it's going to hurt that mid-major school. Whatever coach leaves, that's going to hurt that potential school. So any closing thoughts, Matt, before we go into Indiana versus Purdue?
I just really hope they don't get Brad Stevens. I know the Celtics are in a bit of turmoil. I know we started this episode off with NBA talk, but the Celtics are a bit of a tight situation, shall I say? With Kyrie maybe leaving and some locker room issues, and Brad Stevens having a disappointing year. But Brad Stevens shouldn't leave the Celtics. He should stay in the NBA so that if we ever have issues with Archie, that he can come back here. Because I swear, if he goes to Michigan, I'm going to be a very sorry person. Anyways, that's it.
And then the other option that I stumbled upon just reading different reactions over the last couple days, a lot of people are saying that if Oklahoma City lets Billy Donovan go from his NBA coaching job, Donovan, who won back-to-back titles at Florida, national titles at Florida with guys like Joakim Noah and Al Horford. If Michigan scoops him up, I mean, that's I think that's another almost worst-case scenario as far as IU basketball goes.
And of course, both programs are in completely different areas than they were 2 years ago when Indiana, all of the fans were like, let's get Brad Stevens, let's get Billy Donovan, even though there was a 0.000% chance they were coming. But that would be I think Matt just had an update on the lottery pick. I think that's what he was.
Heater picking 13th.
Heater picking 13th.
And I believe I just saw that the Lakers moved up into the top 4.
What?
The Lakers, who missed the playoffs and had one of the worst odds of getting the number 1 pick, they're now up into the top 4.
Oh, wow.
So they're going to end up with either, Zion or John Morant or RJ Barrett or whoever the 4th best guy is.
Can we just make this a live reaction to the draft?
No, I mean, I definitely, hey.
Okay,
this podcast has always been a wild ride of who knows what. So,
yeah, absolutely. You guys are getting our live reaction to this, so.
Live reaction is good, because I apologize for everyone that obviously most of you will listen to this right after the draft lottery is over, and you will already know who is the number 1 pick, and you will already know if Anthony Davis is going to the Knicks or not. So
Memphis and Lakers are in the top 4. Now New Orleans is also in the top 4.
Gosh.
Jeez.
The Wizards are picking 9th.
Ugh.
The Hawks have 2 top 10 picks. What is going on?
I think my Bulls are going to end up 7th. It looks like. So having the draft lottery in the Windy City didn't we couldn't pull our political corruption enough to jump up into the top 2 or 3. It seems
Bulls are at 7. Damn.
Yeah. Well, this is why the NBA changed the odds a little bit. They want to incentivize teams to win. Shocker.
And then, but then it's annoying on the other side when you're a team that's supposed to pick higher and then you get a lower number. It's like, right. I just want to at least get the number so like the Wizards were the 6th worst team this year. I just want the Wizards to get the 6 or better, basically. And then they didn't. So I'm not sure what the Wizards are going to do. That's for me to contemplate for a very long time with John Wall being out for an entire other year. Oh my goodness, we need to move on, Matthew.
I'm sorry, the Knicks are in the top 4 as well. So the Lakers and the Knicks have a chance to get Zion. Sorry. Anyways,
yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, the Knicks could also finish 4th, and I think they had either the worst odds or the best odds, or the second best.
They're the best odds.
They're the tied for best odds. Yeah. As you did not listen to my introduction of who we were, anyway.
All right, we can move on. We can move on.
Nathan, who won the week this past week for IU sports? As a lot of these programs are starting to wrap up, it's hard to find some of these a little more, but.
Yeah, and look, this is usually the area where we kind of want to focus away from basketball and football because those are really 2 prominent sports. But I wanted to give a shout out to Delroy Baker. He was an offensive lineman who played for the IU football program for the last few years. You may not have heard Baker's name discussed in the NFL draft, and you might be wondering, well, why should we care about Delroy Baker? Well, he was signed by a Canadian Football League team in the CFL. There are professional opportunities for football outside the NFL. Baker signed with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the CFL. So, look, if you're getting a little bit hungry for football action, the CFL season I think starts sometime in July. So you can see big old Delroy Baker blocking for his quarterback up in Winnipeg. One other shout out I wanted to give was to Jorge Campillo, who used to be an IU golfer back in the late 2000s. Campillo was voted the Hilton Golfer of the Month for April in the European Tour. He won his first career golf tournament earlier in the month that came in his 228th career start. So for the 32-year-old Spaniard who golfed at IU about 10 years ago, this is a pretty cool accomplishment for him as he's making money playing golf professionally. What a nice life.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like a great life to me.
Yeah. I also, speaking of golf, I want Indiana to finish up the new golf facilities. That'd be nice.
Absolutely.
To see those.
I'll bring out my clubs. I'll bring
Yeah.
out my clubs when I visit Greg.
Yeah. Okay. And also, Trendon Watford finally, well, I guess, again, finally announced when his decision will be. So he is now, and I think this is actually going to happen this time, not like it's happening that it's not. And then he's going to announce this week and then not, and then announce this past week. And then he's not. He's at May 20th at his high school at 2:30 p.m. He will finally be announcing his picks. So
good for Trendon.
Yeah, we'll see next Monday where he's going. Whether it's LSU or some other place, which most people think it will be LSU, which is crazy to think with all of what's happened around LSU. But I digress.
I don't believe I'm going to digress for you. I can't believe their family's making that decision. That's all. I thought they'd be a little bit more smarter than that. But anyways,
yeah. And let's move on to some Indiana State rivalry. So the next up is the Governor's Cup. Indiana just recently beat out Purdue for this year's Governor Cup. They won 10.5 to 9.5. So what is the Governor's Cup? It was originally called the Titan Series, which always makes me think of the Titan Games with Dwayne Johnson. But it was as a competition to hash out the rivalry between Indiana and Purdue as it was formalized in 2001. Smart idea. The goal was to create a way to track the performance of each school across all sports that both colleges competed in. So, for example, IU has a men's soccer program, Purdue does not, so that does not count. So it's like there's a men's basketball program at both Indiana and Purdue, so they will compete, quote unquote, compete against each other. The event was later renamed to the Crimson and Gold Cup in 2004 and then changed again to its current name, the National Guard Governor's Cup, in 2013. There are a total number of 20 shared sports between the two, and this year was the event's 18th season. So Indiana has now won 9 times over Purdue's 7, and there were 2 years that had a tie to be a total of 18 points. They are awarded in head-to-head competition, or if they do not face each other in head-to-head, they result in the Big Ten standings at the end of the season to factor for that particular sport. So, for example, basically everyone will play each other head-to-head except for all of your indoor, outdoor track and field, cross country, and golf, since that's kind of like a team sport. Even swimming and diving, they were able to go up against each other one time this year. So you get a point for winning, but if the two play each other twice in a season, like basketball, for example, then half a point is awarded for each victory. Softball and baseball, since you play them 20,000 times, they basically go by series victories. Nathan, as we start to dive into this extensive event, what is your take on how significant this sort of event is in the grand scheme of things?
Abrupt break here. The Pelicans won the draft lottery, so it looks like they might get Zion, and then the Grizzlies got the number 2 pick, the top 4
Wow.
Knicks, and then Lakers. So as far as this event goes, and I really liked Rob's breakdown over at IndianaHQ.com. He posted an article yesterday, sort of summarizing how this thing worked and sort of the historic significance of this and the results and the records. Honestly, it's a pretty cool. I mean, you can call it rivalry, a competition. We'll say it's pretty cool to see kind of these other Olympic sports, as they call it, get factored into all of this. Because let's face it, it's just common sense right now dictates that nationally, most emphasis and attention on collegiate sports is placed on men's basketball and football. There are some exceptions, but for the most case, that's kind of what's going on. With this trophy, this Governor's Cup, you get to see kind of the impact different sports can make, and I saw that IU's their second win in the last 5 or 6 years. It's nice to see that tide being turned. I think IU's got the overall lead in the series, so it's good to see. I did stumble across, this is not some sort of unusual competition that IU and Purdue have. I noticed that USC and UCLA have something called the Crosstown Cup. I think Nevada and UNLV has something called the Silver Series. So, it's just a little friendly battle between athletics departments seemingly in the same state, USC, UCLA's case, the same city, where these golfers and the track athletes and the tennis players can all feel like they're contributing to something.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about that, Matt?
No. I think Nathan touched on all my points. I think it's awesome that it's a thing. I didn't know about it until I got up to IU. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But it went until I got there. But I think it's really cool because the Florida schools down here don't do it, and I think it's something pretty unique.
Mm-hmm. So let's go into a little more of the specifics with this year's Governor Cup. And before I list off the 20 different sports, and then you don't remember anything I say, I'll just say all the stuff that Indiana won. So again, out of a 20-point system, your 20 points is the maximum. Indiana got 10.5, which looking at a lot of the recaps is actually about average. It's very close. The 1-point margin is really close, but that's actually how close most of these 18 results have gone. The highest for both Indiana and Purdue was 12.5 points to 7.5 points. So when you look at all of these sports from a large grand scheme of things, both sports against each other at least are pretty balanced on a year-to-year basis. That 12.5 to 7.5 victory for Indiana and Purdue at different times only happened once as well. So really it's 10.5, 11 points with each team winning. So Indiana this year was actually, since the track and field stuff ended up, the outdoor track and field stuff just finished up recently because that's what the standings were waiting for. If it wasn't for both men's and women's outdoor track and field, IU would have lost this year. Would have lost the Governor's Cup because they were down 9.5 to 8.5 points, and then outdoor and men's and women's outdoor track took home second overall when Purdue got third in men's and ninth in women's for IU to jump ahead of Purdue. But so in a year where it looked like the basketball obviously lost twice, football lost, women's lost once, it seems like those the sports that more people know about, it seems like Indiana did worse in. Yes, but there are other sports that Indiana was able to thrive in, and they were women's cross country, men and women swimming and diving, which is no surprise to all of us, but men's tennis, men and women's indoor track and field. Women's basketball got half a point because they split a series with Purdue. Baseball got a point. Softball got half a point because they had 2 series against each other. Women's golf, half a point because they tied. And then men's and women's outdoor track and field. Let's pause there for a second so I can get Nathan's thought on just this year's overall results for Indiana compared to Purdue.
Yeah, I mean, look, like you said, it was a close win, 10.5 to 9.5 out of 20. You can just do the math right there. It's the slimmest of margins for a victory. I just think it's such a cool competition because here's the thing, this sort of stuff appeals to volleyball players in the Midwest or wrestlers or swimmers. To know that they can come in and compete in sports that will be televised on Big Ten Network, and to participate in a battle like this with an in-state rival, I think has to be pretty exciting. And I would, by the way, recommend to those of you who are listening in the Bloomington area or are planning to go to IU in the coming years, you should, it's always fun to go and see some of these other sports, take a Saturday or a Friday evening and go watch an IU volleyball game in their new facility or watch a swim meet, especially one against a rival or against a top opponent. Some of those atmospheres, especially because a lot of them are parents and relatives and friends, they're pretty fiery. I mean, it's not, the 18,000 seats in Assembly Hall necessarily, but, it's very competitive. It's very intense. And, some of the soccer matches and volleyball matches I went to were some of my best IU sports memories when I was a student there.
Mm-hmm. And it was nice this year for Indiana to get the win because last year Purdue took home a 10.5 to 9.5 victory. The year before IU won, but then the 3 previous years Purdue had won. So before this year, Purdue had won the last 4 out of 5. So it seems like Indiana's starting to get to come around. And I don't know enough about all of the sports for both colleges, but it also seems like for some of those sports, like potentially football, but also basketball and everything, that Indiana is starting to come around again in some of those things. But then you've got men and women swimming and diving that are always dominant, no matter how many people they lose. Even though swimming is going to lose Lily King, they're just such high programs that at least against each other, some of those programs are not going to go down. I know track and field always does really well. And yep. I mean, when you also just have out of the 6 different track and field / cross country, all of those events, out of the 6 of them, IU got 5 out of the 6 points. They're really dominating there. And when an event that probably most people don't go to even ever in their time at IU or later, that's a very important event for IU and the Hoosiers to try and get. You've got baseball, softball, golf, tennis that kind of go back and forth. I know it depends on the year sometimes. I know both IU and Purdue are not necessarily the cream of the crop in some of those sports, but what else am I missing? Oh, wrestling. Indiana is typically not very good at wrestling, but I know they've got a good coach. They've got some good players coming up, and maybe not next year, but they're still doing pretty good. Yep. Volleyball, same kind of situation. Women's volleyball was in full rebuild, but now I feel like a good comparison to the volleyball team on a small scale was kind of like the Browns. They weren't as bad as the Browns were in 0-16 season, but they were pretty bad. But now they got new coach, a lot of players, a lot of good recruits, and they have the potential to be much, much, much better. Not the best, but much better than they have been. Women's soccer. I know. Women's soccer this year, Purdue won in double overtime. So I think that kind of splits every year. I know women's soccer is actually pretty good at Purdue, and women's soccer at IU is always really good, but it's not as good as the men's soccer as we always like to see. So have I missed talking about any specific sports, Matt, or is there anything else you want to touch on in those specific sports?
Nope. I would just like to go back to dominating them in basketball, and that's about it.
Which I think most people that listen to this podcast would agree with. So we also wanted to, and before we get into this next statistic that the Hoosier Sound added into the Governor's Cup, We want to give our Indiana HQ store a shout out. If you haven't gone to our website, indianahq.com, you can go to the shop, check out all of the merchandise that we've started to put in there, and we're updating that pretty regularly. Rob, one of the hosts, the contributors, the main guys for Indiana HQ, has been working really hard with everyone to try and get some of that out there. So just go check it off. Just go check it out. Check it out. See what kind of stuff there is. Maybe there's something that appeals to you. There's and we're also doing a 15% off with the coupon code 2019 off season. So 2019 off season, all one word. Get 15% off your order. I know if you spend more than $40, which buying Indiana gear is pretty easy to do, you get free shipping. So even if you don't buy stuff, I know I even went there earlier today and I didn't buy anything, but I'm like, oh, I like that kind of thing. I might get that the next time. There's some cool logos that you don't get at the regular Indiana store, like lock down the border, that kind of stuff that you can be able to represent. So check that out. We wanted to add, since this was more relevant for the basketball and football side of things, I know Nathan had a point about this as well, but I went into the recruiting rankings for football and basketball. I just used 24/7 Sports just because it was easier to go back and forth between the two. But if you were to think about, before we actually give some of the answers, Matt, did you look up recruiting stuff? Nathan, did you look up specific recruiting things before coming on to this? Like,
yeah,
you would dominate or Purdue would dominate?
Yeah.
Did you, Nathan?
Well, I guess I didn't go.
We might have lost it.
I think there may be some technical difficulties we've got going on here. So basically, I didn't go into it year by year, but what I was thinking was, I was like, I feel like it's probably been close for the last decade or two. Is that what ended up happening, or did you guys find something else?
So I found something kind of different. If you were to think about it, you would assume that Indiana basketball would dominate the recruiting. So just going head to head, if Indiana gets a better basketball recruiting, and you'd be 100% right. Out of the 18 seasons I looked at, going back to 2003, because before that they didn't register that. They didn't write it down as much as they do currently. But if you go in those 18 seasons, Indiana beat Purdue in a head-to-head battle for recruiting 16-2. So Indiana got 16 years that they beat Purdue out for a basketball recruit. For football, it was a little different, and that makes a little bit of sense. Football was split right down the middle, 8-8. There were a lot of years that Purdue was dead last, which makes some sense because I think both programs go through spells where they're just the bottom of the Big Ten, just the very bottom of the barrel. But I think the thing, and I'll get your opinion in a second, Matt, I think the thing that stunned me the most was 2019, IU basketball was higher, but Purdue football was higher, which makes sense with someone like David Bell going to Purdue. But then 2018, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, the past 6 seasons before this current one, Indiana got both basketball and football together. It wasn't until 2012 where Indiana basketball won and then Purdue football won. And then it's only in really the 2000s, mid-2000s, late 2000s that Purdue football was back on top. So actually the past 9 to 10 years, both the football and basketball programs have been dominating. Now, whether that says a lot, since Indiana's been losing to Purdue a couple times recently, depends on development. But Matt, what were your thoughts on when you looked up some of the recruiting rankings?
I was really surprised at how badly Purdue football recruited, especially as a school that prides themselves on their football program, home of the quarterback or whatever, they cradle of quarterbacks or whatever they call it. I was really surprised that they didn't outperform us in football recruiting. And I know Darrell Hazel was the greatest thing ever to happen to Purdue football from an IU perspective, but I was still surprised that he still wasn't able to even recruit close to the way that IU was recruiting, especially that IU doesn't have, that rich of a history in football. But when it comes to basketball recruiting rankings are a little bit different because when you look at team rankings, it's more about how many people you have signed than it is about how good of the recruit there is. So a lot of times you would see Indiana maybe have 3 or 4 recruits and be above Purdue. But when you look at Purdue's recruits and who they got, there were people like Ryan Klein, or I think one year I think Carson Edwards was their only recruit they had in that class. And he ended up committing, and you look how good he became. So I think basketball was actually a little bit closer than the recruiting rankings show. Yeah, we've recruited well, but I don't think we've developed very well. But, we're Indiana, and we're going to get really good basketball recruits because, well, we're Indiana and we're a blue blood. But, I think Purdue's actually done pretty well for themselves as far as basketball recruiting. So I think basketball has actually been closer than football has. Now, I think that's about to switch because I think we're about to take a jump with our recruiting as far as basketball to a new level, especially since we just got Romeo last year. We're still in the run for some 5 stars next year. Archie really likes and has shown that he's able to pull 5-star recruits. He's gotten 2 in the last 2 years. I expect him to probably get another one like Caleb Love next year. And Purdue's only had 1 in the last 5 years, and that was Caleb Swanigan. So I do think IU's about to pull away. But yeah, those are my thoughts as far as, IU versus Purdue recruiting wise.
Which is interesting because you talked about how basketball seemed like it was closer, even though the basketball was very lopsided the past 18 years. Purdue has only beaten Indiana in terms of numbers. Right. But that's what I mean. I think it's interesting just because Purdue has also been at some points better than Indiana in basketball just because Matt Painter's been able to develop those guys.
Yeah, and he gets them to stay, like especially during the Crean years. There was a lot of quote-unquote creening going on where we would, have 5 players one class and 5 players the next class, then 4 players the class after that. There's only 13 scholarship. That's 14 players he's bringing. Of course, some are one and dones like Noah Vonleh. Other ones are transferring after 1 year like, what was his name from Crown Point? Grant Galen. They leave after 1 year because he maybe wasn't up to Indiana standards. So I think a lot of that helped because, of course, when you're getting 4 or 5 recruits, you're going to be up further in the recruiting rankings than a team like us, like this year, who only have 2 recruits. Like, as far as this year goes, we have 2 recruits, and on the 24/7 rankings, we're 6th in the Big Ten, even though teams like Minnesota, who have 3 recruits, but no recruits that are even close to being as good as Trace Jackson Davis, are above us, and that's because they have another recruit on top of their 2 4-stars. We're sitting above Purdue, even though they have 3 recruits. So, I mean, just getting better recruits and keeping them is key for Indiana. And the recruiting, I don't look too much into the recruiting rankings per team as much as I do per player, but.
Yeah, I agree because you got football when you got someone like David Bell going to Purdue.
Right.
And then you've got, even though Indiana is above Purdue, you still got a player like Trace Jackson Davis coming here. So I agree with that statement. Now, Nathan, with your thoughts before I gave you all of those statistics, what did you think? How did you react basically to listening to all of those numbers?
No, I mean, I thought that was a really interesting breakdown. And I think the overall point here is, I think IU fans right now might be freaking out a little bit. You see a number of recruits passing up on coming to IU. I think the most recent one was Lester Quinones going to Memphis over IU back on the 10th. And maybe that was for last Friday.
Yeah, Friday. And then Ethan Morton the day before that to Purdue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you see those developments happen, I think a lot of folks say, oh, this team's recruiting sucks. The program is heading in a downward spiral. It usually all works out. That's what I think we're seeing with this pattern over the last, 10, 15 years, that eventually, IU figures it out as far as recruiting goes, whether it's basketball historically, as you talked about the big discrepancy between IU and Purdue there. But even in football now, I think it's kind of crazy that we're talking about both IU and Purdue, at least according to the 2019 football rankings on 24/7 Sports. Both programs right now are top 40 nationally in recruiting, which is kind of incredible when you consider how many players go play down in the SEC or out west in the Pac-12 or in the Texas, Oklahoma area in the Big 12 to get a top 40 ranking as far as football recruiting goes for both Purdue and IU, where, you know, the two teams really don't have much national accomplishment to talk about. I know Purdue did make a Rose Bowl a couple decades ago, but, you know, it's pretty impressive to see where that's going. And I would recommend people follow our football contributor, Blake Betzner, on Twitter, where he really updates you on recruiting things as far as IU's football is concerned.
Yeah. And yeah, I forget the specific point I was about to make, but yeah, it's and with the Rose Bowl at this point, it might as well IU was in the Rose Bowl a couple decades ago at this point, but
well, I have a fun basketball question for you guys, because Matt was talking about the numbers aspect a few minutes ago. If you could choose right now, would you for IU basketball, assuming like Romeo Langford goes to the NBA and some of the other guys who declared comes back next year, if you could choose, would you have one great player coming into the IU basketball program next season, or 3 or 4 good ones? I know Trace Jackson Davis committed already, but, you know, just for the sake of the question, how would you guys, which side would you guys go towards?
I think the general fan base would want, or at least the loud ones would want, that one big splash recruit. But I would probably go to maybe more of, so instead of one big one or more lesser ones, I'd probably go to more lesser ones just because it develops a team a little more. You should get 2 to 3 to 4 recruits every single year to keep it a little more balanced anyway. And I think that's just how Indiana wants to play basketball in general. So that was my thoughts. What about you, Matt?
I want the one big recruit. I like talking about a Romeo Langford or a Zion Williamson. I think it would be fun to see the next Zion in an Indiana uniform. So
now, if you talked about football, maybe I'd go the other way, just because it'd be nice to have a big football player coming to coming to football, get some noise. But I think
it'd be nice to have a Rondale Moore or a
Kyler Murray.
Yeah. It's getting some national attention. Hey, we just need those running backs to start getting 2,000 plus yards again. And then we'll start getting some slight attention. Oh, and you talked about football recruiting, just going to the SEC or the Pac-12, and then the leftover ones that stay here are going to go to Wisconsin, Ohio State, or the Michigan schools. So, let alone Penn State. So, like you said, both of them. And just to piggyback off of both being a top 40 football rating, when I was going back through all of these, it was basically Indiana was last in football or Purdue was last in football, if not the last 2 or 3. So both teams, we've kind of traded being at the very bottom of recruiting for the Big Ten. And now that we're getting into the top 10-ish in the Big Ten for recruiting is getting much better. But I think that about wraps it up for our 88th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really, really do appreciate your support. One of us will be back next Monday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off. Big thanks to that live audience for always coming out and supporting us through that and participating in that ongoing chat. Make sure to stay tuned through updates on Twitter. You can visit our website, indianahq.com, so you can subscribe and get all those episodes right to your phone. And you can also check out our shop. Send us your questions as the audience so we can get them on our next episode. Most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review on iTunes or Facebook. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support is how we grow this podcast so we can reach those passionate IU fans just like you. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.